of the Retired Employees Association. I am Dick Wilkin. I am your Presidente, and I welcome you all to the meeting. I'd like to make a few comments to get started, give you some updates on some things. I think Jim has kind of put you on notice that he will be recording this and it will be placed on our YouTube channel. So be a little careful with what you say because it may live on in infamy. Last month, of course, we didn't meet because of the open enrollment and the virtual health fair that SDP put on. I understand that over 1,000 people attended the health fair. We participated, SIRS, of course, and all the providers, and I think they really did a good job. That event, when SIRS sends out its open enrollment package, they are always good enough to include our recruitment material, a flyer, application, and a payroll deduction notice, and we do that each year. And I wanted to report that as a result of that, in the month of June, we got 50 new members to our organization, and I know there will be some additional ones coming along in July and August, which is typical, but we now have over 1,700 members in our organization, which is the highest it's ever been, and we're very proud of it. And we're growing, and we're going to keep growing. We're going to be looking at some alternative new ways of encouraging new membership in the months ahead. So stay tuned. A little bit on Prop B. I think everybody's pretty up to speed. There was a big article last week in the UT about the fact that on July 10th, new city employees from that date forward will be eligible to join SIRS, and SIRS is ready to enroll them. The other thing that's going on is that, as you know, to get to that point, the city had to pass a couple of ordinances wiping out the language on the charter that prevented people from getting into the system and enabling new members to rejoin. That was accomplished. And I hear from Greg has told me about how city is fully incorporated SIRS. SIRS has put together a task force of its key people to assist the city to make sure that it can provide the city with information to help make good decisions. As Greg explained to me, he wants to make sure that there's no unintended consequences by any of the decisions they make. And so it's really pleased for us retirees to know that SIRS is an integral part of what the city is doing. And even more so, we're thrilled that we'll begin getting new members. Now, the 5,000 or so that were not joined during 2012 to July 10th of this year, there's a lot of issues that have to be negotiated there. SIRS has worked with the city to estimate preliminarily the cost of doing that, but there's tons of issues that have to be decided and negotiated with the bargaining units. And I think it will take a number of months for that to occur, but we're really pleased with that, and really pleased with the fact that SIRS has been so supportive of that whole effort. And as a retiree organization that fully supports defined benefit pensions, we're thrilled that they're going to be rejoining. Those employees are going to be rejoining the new employees and the old employees as well. One of the things that we've told our members is that we're starting to plan, the board is starting to plan for a time when we can have in-person meetings and events in the future. And we did send out a short survey to all the members that are on email, looking for your input on the way we should do this. We're also using our advocacy committee to study this in more detail. A couple of things. Number one, I'll be in the next newsletter letting you know that the board has taken an official position that we are officially encouraging all of our members to get vaccinated. I have, in my presidential comments, talked about how good it is and so forth, but the board is now taking an organizational position, strongly encouraging all of our members to get fully vaccinated. Along those lines, the board today, as a policy issue, adopted a basic underlying position regarding future meetings and events. And that is, and I will let you know that this position is in accordance with the way the survey turned out. And that is that at our future in-person meetings and events, all participants need to be vaccinated. Now, we're nowhere near ready to announce a starting date. The city hasn't even released its facilities at this point to groups, but we've got a lot of issues to work through. And I wanted to just give you a status report just to let you know that that was our basic position. Now we're going to have our advocacy committee start working on the sub issues, such as, what do we do about the luncheons that we have, and a lot of other issues that we have to deal with. But I'll be giving me more information in our next newsletter. But I wanted to let you know that this decision was just made so that you know we're working on it. We know we're looking forward to that time. But as a vulnerable group of people, we want to be extra thorough and extra cautious in how we approach this. And I think we're doing it in a very responsible fashion. Enough of my comments. One of the things that we do in July is we get a nominating committee for the positions that open up at the end of the year. These are officers and directors positions that expire. We have our positions staggered, but a number of them expire at the end of the year of each year. And we have a few officer and director positions that are expiring this December 31st. And one of the things we do is we have, per our bylaws, put together a nominating committee. There are 2 members of the board that have volunteered to be on this and have been approved by the board. And we need a volunteer from the general membership to join this committee. And this committee would be responsible for talking to the existing people that are in these positions, seeing if they wish to continue, potentially recruiting new members who might be interested in running for those positions. And then finally, recommending to the board of directors their recommendations, and then the board adopts those as a panel, a selected panel that's then recommended for a vote of the membership in November. And then the new members and officers would take place, would start in January. So I guess I'd like to know if any of the general members not on the board here that are present today, if there are any that would be willing to volunteer for this wonderful committee. Just raise your hand.
Or unmute and speak up.
Yeah, I don't know if I can see everybody, but I'd really like to get a volunteer. Doesn't take a lot of time, and it gets you more involved in what the activities of the board is. Anybody see anybody hands go up? Okay, well, we'll keep working on it. All right, moving right along, the minutes of again, there's no minutes for our June meeting because we didn't have one, but the minutes of our May meeting can be found on the our website. As far as our treasury reports, the board adopts those. If there are anybody in our general membership that wishes to get a copy of our monthly treasurer's report, all you have to do is to email our treasurer, and her email address is on our website. Let her know you would like to see a copy and she will email that to you. Okay, moving right along, I'd like to call on Cynthia Queen to give us a report for SURS.
Thank you very much, Dick. And I'm impressed to hear that you got 50 new members over the summer. Congratulations. Everyone should join early and often. So congratulations. I'm thankful that you asked Greg if he had any comments to make, because he is pretty funny. He might tell you a joke or two, but we always do prepare before this meeting to, talk about what we want to share with you. And Greg was very helpful to me and he may chime in. But I even thought of one other thing that you'd be really interested in. I want to start out by telling you, we had our board meetings last week, and part of what we do for good governance, obviously, is we make sure that we have intelligent and diverse members that meet our needs, and we have officers that we elect. So at our recent meeting, we elected Karina Coleman as our new president. She is excellent, been on our board for a while, and she is one of the Sempra Energy's investment managers. Very pleased to have Karina as our president. We actually have 7 new board members this time. And I realized that there is one that is very important for me to tell you about because you'll be very proud. I know that Mary Bush, I don't see Mary Bush on right now, but she is very regular and longtime attendee of REA and kind of famous in city circles. And she raised a good family. And I think she has 4 kids who are all quite successful, but one of them is a fancy financial person and is now on our board. Michelle Bush, Mary's daughter, is one of your SD-SIRS board, and she's so cool.
That's
I got to tell you, when we did the training, we had just kind of realized that that's exactly who she was, and we were like gushing, like, you know. And the other, I felt kind of bad. I'm like, sorry, I know you were all really great too, but this is like famous in the city world. So that's just really neat. So go Mary Bush, go Mary and Wally for raising good kids. So you're, as always, your board has some very capable, the board has very capable people on it taking care of all the money. And they also get to boss Greg around, and he does a very, very good job of, it is a great deal of work to be the CEO and to assist your board. And it's very, it's a good learning experience to see what a great job he does, really making sure they're all informed and that they know about all the important things like our members. So good job, Greg, on having a full board, and good job to our board. Now, with that, another thing that was discussed at our recent board meeting is, as you may have noticed, is that the stock markets and our financial markets have been doing well. Are all you guys getting rich? Your stocks? Okay, good. So you may be wondering if the market's doing well, how's SD-SIRS? They usually do a pretty good job. And so yes, pleased to report that we are well diversified and always keeping good track of this. So it looks like our recent returns are coming in at about 20%. And that is really good news. It's great for all of you and me and our fund. And it's also good news for the plan sponsors because that helps in the annual bill that they pay. So just very pleased with all that good work that the team is doing. Now, you may remember we announced this already, but it'll be at the end of July here when you'll see your cost of living adjustment on your check. And if you have a member portal account and you go in and look at your very cool advice, it will give you those details there. And you can even look at your COLA history. As you know, the municipal code allows for up to 2% when various conditions are met of an annual increase each year. And this year, the economy was not doing great the whole entire time, as you'll recall. And so everybody who retired before July of 05 will get the full 2%. And then it's slightly less increments as we come up to the more recent years. That information is very handy on a chart on the front of our website. And it'll also be on your member portal. But if people are asking, we are making sure that information is readily available to them. And also glad that that is available. Now, another thing that you may notice on your next paycheck, because I'm very proud of all of you for looking at them closely, is related to the REA dues. And I want to tell you, so you know that you're my favorites, right? Like it's obvious, right? I exist to serve you. Just literally, I put on makeup today. I left the house. I'm here. And so you guys matter so much to me. So if you don't think we were bummed when we had a teeny tiny one-line coding issue that didn't deduct $2 of REA dues last month, it's like a knife in my heart.
And you're going to pay for that? That's great.
Well, to be honest, Marcelle Rossman herself offered to pay the entire thing just to save having to, to work on it. But it's just, obviously we pay everybody every month and we pay people correctly and we handle, $10 billion worth of money, taking care of everything is very important to us. But I want you to understand all the pieces that go into everything. And so we're just wanted you to know how much we're valued, that you are valued. And I appreciate our partnership because we were all on the phone right away when noticed it the first time. And some people did notice, which we keep telling you to look at your paycheck. And but importantly was we have to make sure we knew what happened and how to fix it and let you guys know that, and your members know that we certainly didn't just get divorced from you or something like that. I mean, it'd be terrible. So, thank you to Dick and all of you all. We worked together on make sure it was the accurate language. I don't want people freaking out about something thinking, it's worse than it is, but sent out that great e-blast because it was just the REA
Join the
member.
meeting.
and sent out that e-blast. And then thank you to Dick and for his good ideas, and to Jessica Maloney here, who doesn't usually say much, but she does everything that you want behind the scenes. We created postcard, you'll know it when it gets there, that we're mailing to everyone who pays REA dues, that membership, and sending them a postcard that'll arrive a week before you get paid, just letting people know that the deduction didn't go through last week, but we'll take $4. Last month, we'll take $4 this time, and it will go back to $2 the next time. And we're all good. Didn't forget about anybody. We love everybody. And I want to give a big shout out to Sandra Clausen, who I think you all know is our health manager. And Marcel Rossman is able to join us now. And literally the first day, they sat there with the computer programmers and spent multiple hours and figured out what it was. And it was just really good teamwork overall. And I want you to know how much everybody cares about the $2 dues. And I say that with total sincerity. So I thank you all for your help and your quick forgiveness, because you all know that we are absolutely partners, and that our reputation and your reputation are intertwined, and it all matters a whole bunch. So thank you.
And Cindy, we really appreciate how you guys jumped on this and cooperated with us in figuring out what happened and what to do and to notify people. So we really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. And maybe a couple more new members when they see the cute squirrel. You never know. So we're here for you. So that was a whole bunch of information I shared there. And but if you have any other questions for Greg or Marcel or I, or anything else you'd like us to add, just let me know.
Anybody have any questions for Cynthia or Greg or Marcel? Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, wait, Greg has a question. Dick, I'm sorry, Greg has a question.
I just wanted to add, one thing that when we read the local media reports about some of the pension plans across the United States that are in horrible funding problems, and one of the reasons is that the plan sponsors kick the can down the road and don't make their required contributions. I'm just very, very pleased that even through these tough economic times we've been through, all three of our plan sponsors have continued to make their ADC payments, and they're actually required contribution payments, and they made their fiscal payments in the beginning of July. So I'm just pleased to report our plan sponsors are putting in the money into the plan that they promised they would and that they're required to.
Great. Okay, thank you, Cynthia, Greg, Marcel. Appreciate that very much. Appreciate all the support you provide to the retiree organizations, and most particularly REA. Okay, with that, I would like to adjourn the business part of our meeting, and we're going to go to our program now, and I'd like to introduce a board member, Joan McNamara, who will introduce today's speaker. Joan?
Hi, everybody. So today we're going aboard the USS Midway Museum. But first, I want to welcome aboard our speaker, Brian Schimpf. Now, Brian grew up in Pennsylvania and entered the Air Force, actually, after completing his college studies. He served at Hanscom Air Force Base outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And after he got out of the Air Force, he entered got into a career with computer software development. So he spent his whole career, I think, on the East Coast doing software. And then when they retired, Brian and his wife, Cindy, decided to move to San Diego. And that was back in 2015. And I think he was living downtown at the time and got interested in the Midway. So he became a docent at the USS Midway Museum, and he's been there since 2016. So welcome aboard, Brian, and we're really looking forward to hearing about the museum. Your turn.
Thank you very much, Joan. The challenge is always when you get a great introduction like that to live up to it.
Mm-hmm.
So let me see if I can share my screen.
You did it.
Okay, Can everybody see that?
Yep, good.
Great. Thank you very much. And can you hear me clearly, or do I need to get closer to? Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up. Well, again, thank you very much. I am, in addition to being a docent, I am part of the Speakers Bureau for the USS Midway Museum. So there's a bunch of us that go around and just tell nice folks about, you know, kind of what's going on, and we have a variety of presentations that we can make, and I'm pleased to be here this morning making this one. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the ship itself, the history of the ship. My cat is now trying to photobomb me, so we may need a little adjustment here. I want to talk just briefly about the battle. The ship was named after the Battle of Midway, did not participate in the Battle of Midway. Talk a little bit about the process by which the ship then became a museum here in San Diego. We are one of the top tourist attractions here in downtown San Diego. And then if you haven't been, or if you have been and are interested in just kind of knowing a little bit about what is entailed in visiting the ship, I'll talk about that a little bit as well. I think if you have questions, it probably is best to enter them in the chat, and then I will tackle those when I get done. So we sometimes talk about the wow factors of an aircraft carrier. So let me start with the obvious. The ship is pretty big. She is about 1,000 feet long and about 140 feet wide. Her draft, and draft is the measure of the amount of ship basically below the water line. So from the water line to the keel. When she was fully loaded with people and food and fuel and airplanes, that was about 35 feet. Today, she's more like 29 feet. So she's riding a little higher in the water. And her displacement was an impressive 69,000 tons. It's fun when you're on the ship and talking to guests and they ask some of these questions and you could give them some of these wow answers. The ship's crew, when she was fully manned, was about 4,500 people. That was about 2,500 in the ship's crew and about 2,000 in the air wings. So that's all the pilots and the mechanics that maintained the aircraft. We do have 3 current active aircraft carriers home ported here in San Diego at the Navy base. Today, if you're anywhere near downtown today, you will only see one of them. That is the USS Theodore Roosevelt. The other 2, the Carl Vinson and the Abraham Lincoln, are out on maneuvers right now. And their crews are larger, north of 5,000 in the crew. And that's primarily because the active aircraft carriers are all nuclear powered. And it takes a lot of people to safely operate and maintain 2 nuclear reactors. Some more wow factors. On the Midway, with her crew of 4,500, served 13,000 meals a day. That's between 10 and 15 tons of food consumed every day, 1,000 loaves of bread, 4,500 pounds of meat, 3,000 pounds of potatoes. The logistics of keeping the ship resupplied is really a fascinating story as well. A little bit about the history of the ship. I mentioned she did not participate in the Battle of Midway. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Midway was built during the flurry of World War II. So her keel was laid in Virginia in 1943. She was built incredibly quickly. It was less than 2 years from her keel being laid till she was afloat. She was commissioned in September of 1945, just after the Japanese surrender. So she saw no activity in World War II. In 1950, in the mid-1950s, she went through her first major modification. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit on the next slide. But one of the interesting things about Midway, she was active from 1945 to 1992. So she was an active aircraft carrier during the transition from propeller-driven aircraft, World War II vintage, to jet aircraft, in fact, that we have today. And that led to a number of changes in the way aircraft carriers operate. And I'm going to talk about probably the most important one. These are three layouts of the deck of the Midway looking from above. So you can see in the top one, that's how she was originally built. And she was what we call a straight deck. And what that meant was, as a plane came in to land, every fixed wing aircraft that comes in to land on an aircraft carrier has a tail hook, and it catches an arresting gear cable, and that's what stops the plane. If the plane doesn't stop for any reason, then it can be a really awkward situation if you have anybody up in the forward part. I don't know if people can see my cursor, but up in this forward part of the flight deck, which is where the planes take off from, you can't really safely have aircraft up there and landing at the same time. So in the mid-50s, she went through the first major modification where an angled landing deck was added. And then in about 10 years later, she went through another modification, and that is the third image that you see. The original angled landing deck was set at an 11-degree angle. The current one, or the final one, whoops, I clicked something I didn't mean to click, is now at a 13-degree angle. And this was a British innovation. The British Navy innovated, or came up with the idea of the angled landing deck. And that meant that you can have planes, you can have aircraft landing on this angled landing area. And if they don't stop for any reason, when they get to the end, they can just go around and make another attempt to land. And you can literally be having aircraft take off and land at exactly the same time. Again, the aircraft take off from the very front of the ship using a catapult system that uses steam to accelerate the aircraft to their flying speed. And what stops them in landing is a tail hook and arresting gear. So Midway made her first combat tour in Vietnam in the mid-60s. In the second half of the 60s, she went through that second major modification that I talked about. She had multiple combat tours in Vietnam. And in fact, Midway was one of the ships that participated in the evacuation of Saigon at the very end of the Vietnam conflict. And we have an exhibit about that on the hangar deck of the Midway. She actually participated in Operation Desert Storm, the war in Iraq, in 1991. And she was decommissioned here in San Diego in 1992. So from commissioning to decommissioning was 47 years, which is, at the time, she was the longest serving commissioned ship in the Navy. Today, the rule of thumb for an aircraft carrier is we expect aircraft carriers to last approximately 50 years. As I mentioned, aircraft carriers today are nuclear powered. They start out with a full load of nuclear fuel in their reactors, and that fuel will last about 25 years. So Midway had to be refueled about twice a week. The Theodore Roosevelt has to be refueled once every 25 years. But it takes about between 2 and 3 years to refuel a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. And so about halfway through her lifetime, a carrier will be refueled. At the end of the second, when it's time to refuel again, by then technology has moved toward, you have a piece of steel that's been sitting in salt water for 50 years. It's time to move on and decommission the ship. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Battle of Midway. This is a painting that shows the Battle of Midway. And again, I just want to mention, just want to emphasize this, that because this does cause some confusion, the ship is named after the battle. The United States has named aircraft carriers over many things over the years. In the early days, they were named after Revolutionary War battles. So we had the Lexington, the Yorktown, the Saratoga, the Oriskany. There were a bunch of sort of what I'll call generic names: the Enterprise, the Intrepid, the Kitty Hawk, the America. Lately, they have been largely named after people and those primarily United States presidents. So we have the George Washington, the Abraham Lincoln, the Theodore Roosevelt, George H.W. Bush, the Ronald Reagan. So Midway was commissioned after the battle. Want to talk a little bit about the battle because it was so important. The Battle of Midway occurred almost exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor in early June of 1942. And it was a critical event for the morale of the entire country. Those had not been very good 6 months. After Pearl Harbor, the Japanese had pretty much run unopposed through the Pacific. The Japanese had a goal, established a goal to take Midway Island, and I'm going to show you a map in a moment, and also destroy the US aircraft carriers. Admiral Yamamoto, who was the supreme commander of the Japanese Navy, had particularly wanted to destroy the carriers with his attack on Pearl Harbor. And as it happened, none of the American carriers were in port that day. So while there was significant destruction against the battleships that were in Pearl Harbor, none of the aircraft carriers were there. And this brings up military technology, especially for naval warfare, was really going through a change in the early to mid parts of the 20th century. Before that, naval battles were basically, big battleships that would sight each other and kind of slug it out. And that's what you saw more of in the Atlantic War, World War II. You had these big British dreadnoughts, the German battleship Bismarck. You would just get these big battleships and they would sort of slug it out. Aircraft carriers were a relatively new thing, even though the first United States aircraft carrier was actually in the early 1920s. But aircraft launched from aircraft carriers could go much farther than a battleship could shoot its gun and protect and shield the aircraft carrier from attack. And Midway was one of the first battles in which the ships in combat, it was fought exclusively with carrier-launched aircraft, and the combatant ships never were in sight of each other. The Japanese and United States aircraft carriers were never in sight of each other. Here's a map that just kind of shows why was Midway so important. So here's the entire Pacific. In April of 1942, you see this solid yellow line, which is the area that Japan controlled. And Admiral Yamamoto very much wanted to control the dotted line. And you'll see right there in the middle is Midway. Midway has that name, by the way, because it's roughly midway between San Francisco and Tokyo. Especially after the Doolittle raid, where American bombers launched from the USS Hornet, an American aircraft carrier, actually were able to drop bombs on the Japanese homeland. Admiral Yamamoto wanted Midway because you notice how close it is to Hawaii, and it is a way station. At the time, the United States had an air base there. He definitely wanted that air base, and he wanted to destroy the American aircraft carriers. So a couple of important factors about the Battle of Midway. I like to say the Battle of Midway was basically won by a bunch of mathematical experts sitting at desks. US naval intelligence had broken the Japanese naval code. And so naval intelligence was able to read Japanese messages. So they knew there was a major attack coming in June. They weren't sure where because the Japanese always referred to the target as AF. And so the commanding officer of the air base at Midway sent a message out that said, I'm having trouble with my water supply. And within a day, naval intelligence intercepted a Japanese transition that said AF has problems with its water supply. There had been some thought that AF might refer to the Aleutian Islands, but with the tricking them into sending the message about the water supply, they knew that Midway was the target. There were 4 Japanese aircraft carriers involved in the battle. They were flexible in that they had the capability of carrying either bombs or torpedoes. that flexibility was good, but it meant that the commander had to make a decision about whether to arm his aircraft with bombs or torpedoes. You use bombs if you're attacking a land target, you use torpedoes if you're attacking ships. The Japanese admiral, Nagumo, really wanted to get the American carriers, so he had his aircraft armed with torpedoes, but he couldn't find the American carriers. This was before the days of spy satellites and GPS and all the rest of that. So he decided to rearm his aircraft with bombs to attack Midway Island itself. While that was happening, he was attacked by carrier-based aircraft from the American carriers, at which point he knew the American carriers were in range. So he made a critical mistake in ordering the ordnance of his aircraft to be changed back to torpedoes in an attempt to get the carriers. The initial attack from the American craft were torpedo bombers. It was completely ineffective. And the torpedo bombers are remarkably vulnerable during this time. They had to fly very low because you can't drop a torpedo from really high up. You have to be really close to the water, and you have to be flying in a straight line. So there were 43 torpedo bombers that attacked the Japanese ships. Only 5 of them returned to their carriers. But what happened was the attack by the torpedo bombers drew the Japanese fighter aircraft that were supposed to be protecting the aircraft carriers down very low to attack those torpedo bombers. While that was happening, and while the ordnance was being changed on the aircraft, 3 squadrons of dive bombers from the USS Yorktown and the USS Enterprise found the Japanese carriers and took out and conducted an attack. The flight decks of the Japanese carriers were full of aircraft that were fully fueled with bombs and torpedoes just lying around. Any direct hit caused massive explosions and fires. Within 6 minutes, 3 of the Japanese carriers had been hit and set on fire. A few hours later, the 4th Japanese carrier was attacked and also set on fire. Japanese counterattack did disable and ultimately sink the USS Yorktown. But this was the aftermath of the Battle of Midway. The Japanese lost 4 aircraft carriers, 1 heavy cruiser. Importantly, they lost 3,000, they had sustained 3,000 casualties. And a lot of these people were not only the pilots who flew the aircraft, but the mechanics who maintained the aircraft, the sailors who knew how to operate an aircraft carrier, how to launch and recover aircraft. And Japan just didn't have the capability to replace those losses. So 6 months into the war, even though the war lasted for a long time, Japanese naval activity in the Pacific was really hampered, and they never recovered. And you can see the US losses. The USS Yorktown was the one carrier that was sunk. By the way, the wreckage of the Yorktown in the Pacific Ocean was discovered a few years ago by Robert Ballard, who is also the person who discovered the Titanic. So we know where the Yorktown is. I hope this animation works okay. There have been a couple of movies made about the Battle of Midway. This one was made in 1976, and this was one of these Hollywood blockbusters where essentially any male actor in Hollywood at the time got a part in this movie. You can see Charlton Heston, Henry Fonda played Chester Nimitz, Robert Wagner, Robert Mitchum, James Coburn, Richard Crenna was in this movie. And then in 2019, there was another movie, so much more recently made about the Battle of Midway. If any of you are fans or your families are fans of the TV series This Is Us, Mandy Moore, who stars in that, was in this movie. Woody Harrelson played Chester Nimitz. I sometimes have trouble wrapping my brain around Woody Harrelson and Henry Fonda played the same character, but we'll set that aside. One of the interesting things about this movie is The producers very much wanted a particular American aircraft called the Devastator. That was the torpedo bomber that was used by the Americans in the Battle of Midway. They could not find one. Apparently, none of them have survived the war. So they built one, and it's a movie prop. It's largely made of styrofoam. And at the end of the movie, they said, so what are we going to do with this Devastator? And we said, we'll take it. And it is now on the hangar deck of the USS Midway. We had to hang it up high because, as I mentioned, it's made of styrofoam. It's a movie prop. So if you let 10-year-old boys get too close to it, they would poke holes with their fingers. So, but if you come to the Midway, you can see that. Let me talk. So I mentioned that Midway was decommissioned in 1992 here in San Diego. She was taken up to Bremerton, Washington, which is where the Pacific mothball fleet is, and she was put into mothballs. And one of these three carriers in this image is the Midway. I think it's the one in the middle, but their numbers have been somewhat obscured, so it's hard to tell. And you can see some other ships. The Navy typically keeps ships in mothballs for some period of time. Midway was actually scheduled to be scrapped. And I sometimes tell guests, when you're walking around on the Midway, you're walking around on what could have been 1 billion razor blades. But in 1993, a group here in San Diego formed an organization that at the time was called the San Diego Aircraft Carrier Museum. They were negotiating with the Navy. They wanted to build a museum to naval aviation, which had its birthplace here in San Diego over on Naval Air Station North Island. And they thought an aircraft carrier would be the perfect place to build such a museum. The Navy said, well, we can let you have the Midway. And our folks said, yes, absolutely, that would be great. This was not without controversy, as often happens, I think, in any kind of major activity like this. There was some controversy. There were some people that were very concerned about obstructing harbor views, that if you were on the Embarcadero, all you'd see is this big gray ship and not the water. And they were also concerned about the environmental impact of having such a big ship, somewhat, not in great repair. Those were all negotiated out. So in August of 2003, the Navy donated the ship to the Aircraft Carrier Museum. They required the museum to have $50,000 in cash because the Navy was convinced that the museum would fail, that people wouldn't come and look at an aircraft carrier. And so they were willing to donate the ship, and actually the Navy towed her down from Bremerton down here to San Diego. But they said, you need to have $50,000 in cash because when you run out of money and you want to give it back, we're going to charge you to tow her back up to Bremerton. So she was towed down to San Diego and docked over at Naval Air Station North Island. In January of 2004, she was towed across the harbor from Naval Air Station North Island to her current home. And if you can see this picture, I hope you can see this picture. This is the Midway being moved into her current location. If you're familiar with the downtown, you could look behind her and there's a lot of high rises that aren't there in this picture. This is from 2004. And if you look very closely, you can see how much mud is being stirred up. The area where the ship is currently docked is fairly shallow, relatively shallow for the size of the ship. So her keel is really close to the mud, and you can see that being stirred up. A considerable amount of effort went in preparing the ship for guests, emergency lights and sprinklers. We put chain link fence around the entire flight deck because we were pretty convinced that having guests fall overboard into San Diego Harbor was going to discourage visitation. Adding public restrooms. The restrooms on an active Navy ship are not what you'd want, your wives and mothers and little children. And of course, we built a gift shop and cafe because that's an important part of revenue. So the grand opening was on June 7th of 2004, which was 62 years after the battle. nobody knew what to expect. And of course, I wasn't around for this, but many of our volunteers are still around from these days. And the expectation is, maybe a couple hundred people would show up, and we just let them on and kind of showed them around. Over 3,000 people showed up at that first day. There was very little exhibit space open. We only had 8 aircraft at the time. We currently have 33. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's one of the top tourist attractions here in San Diego. In 2012, we topped 1 million visitors for the year. 2019, so our last pre-pandemic number, we had 1.3 million. In 2020, I looked this up, we had a total of 340,000 guests because we were closed and open and closed and open and closed and open. So far in 2021, we're at 275,000 guests. So I think we'll end up this year, 2021, between 500,000 and 600,000 guests, which is not where we were pre-pandemic, but it's a lot better than we've been. If you go to visit the museum, just a few more words, it's primary self-guided. There are a bunch of us docents who are around the ship. Some of us are actually giving talks or tours, but largely you kind of go around and look at the exhibits. There is an audio tour that's available in 6 languages, and that's included in the admission fee. So you can go and stand in front of aircraft or in a space, and the audio tour will give you a little bit of information about what's going on. These are the major exhibit areas. So the hangar deck is 1 deck below the flight deck. That's where the aircraft were worked on. So that's a very large space. The flight deck itself is where the aircraft took off and landed. That's the great view. It's a lot of fun. We do have parts of the island open for tours, including the navigation bridge where the captain's station was. Admiral's Country is where the admiral's cabin was, the captain's cabin, and some of the planning areas. The forecastle is the area where the anchor chains are. That people really like that because the anchor chains are pretty big on an aircraft carrier, and that also shows how the enlisted men slept. City at Sea shows the mess areas where the enlisted men ate, where the officers' wardroom was. The chapel is down there and some other exhibits. And then we do have one of the engine rooms open. We do not have an elevator going to the engine room. So I always am careful to warn people that to get to the engine room, it's down 4 stairways and up 4 stairways. We have a lot of wonderful volunteers. This is an image of some of our safety folks. Our safety folks are outstanding. They're trained in first aid, they're trained in security. Many of them are Navy veterans. They know more about the ship than I do. The docents, we have an exhibits group. We have volunteers who maintain the ship, volunteers who maintain our aircraft, education, and outreach. And I've got our website there. We also have membership, so you can become a member of the Midway, and that helps us. I have to say, over the past year, when we were so constrained about having people pay admission to come on board, it was our members that sort of kept us going. So we are very, very grateful for them. And I'm going to say thank you and take you to one last. I love this image of the Midway at night, taken from Pacific Highway. So I am going to stop screen sharing. And
Brian,
yes.
Thank you very, very much for an outstanding presentation. I'd like to, you're willing to take some questions now, aren't you?
I am.
Right. People kind of use your chat things to let us know you want to raise your hand and we'll call on you. Questions? Okay, Dan.
Yeah, I do professional photography now as a retiree, and I was asked to do some naval retirements on board the Midway. And it's really a spectacular place to have those, and it made it seem that much more special. So what kind of relationship do you have with the Navy now?
That's a great question. Thank you. I should really include that in the presentation. We have a terrific relationship with the Navy. We are not part of the Navy, so we get no federal money of any kind. But the Navy actually has given us a hangar over on North Island. So we do some of our aircraft restoration over there. And as you mentioned, we have a lot of Navy ceremonies on the flight deck of the Midway. So retirements, change of command, re-enlistments. And one of the really nice things about that is if a sailor is having a re-enlistment or there's a retirement and you want to invite a bunch of family, it's a lot easier to get them onto the Midway than it is to get them admission to the military base over at North Island or the Navy base. So yeah, and this has just started to pick up recently. I normally work on Saturdays, and I would say more often than not, there's at least one, if not two or three, events of various kinds. And they do a great job setting up a lot of flags, and sometimes we've even had bands. So it's great for the guests to see, the Navy is still alive, the Navy is still active.
Well, the retirement itself drew a lot of spectators. I mean, I had a lot of spectators around me.
Yeah.
Uh,
Our safety folks do a pretty good job of sort of roping off the area, so you don't just get random people coming in and sitting in the chairs. But the guests are welcome to kind of hang out by the rope line and applaud and cheer and yell out their thanks to whatever's going on. Yeah.
Okay, Jean?
Yes, I'm curious. Several times on the news, they show Chinese aircraft carriers, and they're, to me, so strange because they have an upward.
Yes.
Yes, can you explain that?
Sure. Yeah, that's called a ski lift.
What?
It's called a ski lift or a ski jump sometimes. And so Russian aircraft carriers are built that way now, and so are the Chinese. With that, you can launch an aircraft that has the capability to do what we call very short takeoff. So it's got some upward thrust. So you can only launch certain kinds of aircraft with that ski jump aircraft carrier, that ski jump front. But it means you don't need the catapults and all of that thing. So it's a quasi-religious debate. You'll ask some people and say, oh, that's absolutely the right way to do it. And you'll talk to other people that say, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. The weirdest one is Great Britain is currently working on building a new aircraft carrier that is a hybrid. If you look at the very bow of and I think it may be the Queen Elizabeth, one side is ski jump and one side is flat with a catapult. It just looks bizarre to me. But yes, but that's the reason. There are some aircraft that can take off from that kind of carrier, but only a limited number.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Another great question. You guys are awesome.
Right. Who's next?
When you're a docent on the ship, the most common question you get is, where's the bathroom? So this is fun.
I'm not seeing anybody. Do you have, Brian, what is the organization's operating budget? What are we talking about a year?
That's a really good question. I think it's in the single digits of millions, 7-8 million, something along those lines.
Is it entirely self-sufficient at this point?
Yes. We do get some grants for some of the educational work that we do, but by and large, it's we're funded by donations from. We have corporate sponsors. Boeing has sponsored. Scripps has done some sponsoring for us. individuals giving through membership, and then the admission fees. I saw pop up on the chat about educational programs. We do a variety of things. We do some outreach to schools. In fact, one of the popular things we have is overnights. So we'll have a school group come in, or a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout group come in, and they'll stay on the ship overnight and they'll sleep in the berths where the sailors slept. Those, if you've been on the ship, there's a very mattress that's about 2 inches thick, and it's sitting on a slab of steel. So those days are long gone for me, but the kids really seem to enjoy it. We do some educational programs for educators, especially in the summer. I think we're trying to do a little bit of that this year. Well, obviously, we didn't do any of it last year, but we'll bring in a bunch of school teachers, middle school teachers, high school teachers, for 2 or 3 days and talk about the history of the war. As you can imagine, we have a lot of volunteers who have some personal experiences that they can share, and those have proved to be very valuable. And we also have folks that go out to schools. I've actually participated in a couple of Bring a Veteran to School Day, where I went and sat with a kindergarten class and just talked about, my experience as an Air Force veteran.
All right, do we have any? We have time for one or two more. Joan.
Yeah, want to thank you, Brian, for joining us. Great talk about the Midway. But you mentioned, the various Navy events, retirements or reenlistments that go on. But doesn't the public also have the opportunity to hold events on the Midway? And if so, how often were they doing that before, COVID hit?
Another terrific question, Joan. You guys are awesome. Yes. So you can basically rent the museum in the evening and do an event. And we've had events with a couple hundred people. We've had events with a couple thousand people. Those are sort of corporate events. And so we've served dinner on the flight deck. We set bars up on the flight deck. And then we also do a couple of museum-sponsored events. In fact, we just did for the 4th of July, we had an event where you could buy a ticket, just anybody, any member of the public could buy a ticket, come up on the flight deck of the Midway and watch the fireworks. We generally do a movie showing of the movie Top Gun, at least once over the summer. That has been so popular and has sold out so quickly that we're now adding additional showings. And I think we're going to do that again either in August or September. And again, they put up one of these big inflatable movie screens on the flight deck. The flight deck is a great place. For the 4th of July, we just basically covered the flight deck with AstroTurf, and people could come and bring camp chairs, but a lot of families just brought blankets and sat and watched the fireworks. So yeah, so it's a combination. How often? When we're really hitting our stride and when the convention center is very busy, we might do 2 or 3 of those events a week, because it's popular. If you're running a company and there's a big conference at the convention center, you'd like to invite your customers to something that's a little unusual. Hey, why don't you come over to this aircraft carrier and we have, there's this great group of 3 women who sing like all the 40 songs, and they dress up in the khaki uniforms, and they sing, they're like the Andrews sisters. It's really wonderful. We also have a Tom Cruise lookalike who comes every once in a while and just stands around and poses for pictures. And you're wearing a flight suit or Maverick's white uniform. So, yeah.
Greg, you had a question, Greg.
Yeah. Once in a while when I'm walking down around Seaport Village, I see fireworks coming off the bow of the Midway. Is that special events or is that scheduled?
No, that's special events. And again, if somebody rents the museum for the evening, that's one of the options. And we actually launched those from the very front of the flight deck. So they set up, the fireworks up there, and that's always a big big win too. So yeah, that's us. That's us doing.
Nice.
And I,
Joan,
well,
Joan.
let Joe go because I already had one, but Joe?
Oh, Joe, yeah. You're muted, Joe. Okay, no, you did it back. There you go.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wanted to say a word about memberships. This is an unsolicited pitch for membership on the Midway. I have been a member for years, and it's just a great outlet for visitors. You can take them down. You get about four passes on there. Take your guests down half a day. You've got the cafe right there on the fantail, and I've never had any complaints about all the visitors were really tickled. And I think it's one of the best buys in town, especially for entertaining tourists. Thank
What
you.
does it cost, Joe? What's membership cost?
I think it's $40.
Brian, what does it cost for membership?
Oh, there's a senior discount also.
There are,
$50.
yeah, there are levels. There are a number of levels.
The retiree discount is $50.
And it's like the zoo. As you go to a higher level, you get more passes and you get invited to some other things.
Right.
Joe, thank you. You're like a plant. And thank you for being a member. I just want to repeat, it was our members who, even though they couldn't come to the ship, they maintained their membership. That really kept the ship alive. We were able to keep an awful lot of the paid staff on salary.
Great.
And you can imagine our chief engineer got a lot of work done while the ship was closed down because he could be making noise and dust and everything. So, but our members saved our lives, basically.
Hey, John?
Well, I just wanted to add something too, is there's an aircraft carrier in New York that's docked in New York, and
The
they
Intrepid.
don't do theirs with docents. And I wondered if you could comment about that, because I've always heard that we're so successful out here with the Midway because of all the docents.
Well, since I'm a docent, clearly the answer is the secret of our success is the docents.
Right?
There are other ship museums there are 5 aircraft carrier museums in the United States. And I think the Intrepid does pretty well. They have the advantage, like us, of being right in a downtown. I mean, think about the Midway. How many of these kind of attractions are literally within walking distance of a bunch of major hotels? We get an awful lot of visitors when the convention center is cooking along, because we'll get people who will come down for, just a couple of hours. Yeah, we like to think that our volunteers make a huge difference. I just think the novelty of it, and not to sound too old, young people today, it's important to have an understanding and appreciation of what has gone into our history of our country. Some people walk through the enlisted berthing area and say, how did these 18 and 19-year-olds, get along with each other well enough that they didn't kill each other?
Yeah.
That's one of the great accomplishments. So yeah.
And Brian, Francine Hall has asked how they become a member. What's the contact information?
Best thing to do is go to just go to midway.org. All that information would be there on the website.
Great. Well, thank you all again. This is a great presentation. You did a great job.
Thank
You
you.
must be one of their top docents, and thank you all very much. And thank you for attending our general meeting today for REA. You're welcome to stay and chat and visit a while. And thanks to Jim Barras, who does a superb job of getting these Zoom sessions set up and monitored. So we'll see you all next month. Thanks again. Bye-bye. We're adjourned.
Brian's still there.